Welcome to Good Thinking, good thinkers from all around the world. Let us know who you are and where you're from. Welcome to this little bit of time each week that we spend on stealing a little bit of time away from all the time we are told to spend on what to think so we can give ourselves just a little bit of the luxury of improving how we think. So welcome here again. Let us all know who you are and where you're from. The screen, I don't see all of the comments right away as they hit, so there's a little delay, and sometimes I'll miss your comment, but if I do, I apologize in advance. I'll try to get it after the live stream or come back to it. And if you're joining us after the live stream, still participate because we need to spread good thinking. All right, and today's topic, we are talking about adaptability. And that is a little bit different than just the fact that you might have adapted. So what does it mean? How do we think about it? How can we cultivate it? And that's what we're tackling today. So welcome, welcome, welcome. All right, first question. How many of you have heard people referring to now as the new normal? How many people are referring to, how many of you have heard people saying, oh, now is the new normal? Or maybe, when are we going to get back to the way things were? Those are the two questions. So have you heard people referring to this kind of nostalgia for the way things were? And it may be the pandemic. There may be other things that you're dealing with as a result of the pandemic or not related to the pandemic. But this pandemic is like the first kind of global thing that we all have got to contend with. So that's my question. I'm going to welcome some people on to Good Thinking. I'm going to say, okay, fantastic. So we've got, now I don't know your name because this is what it looks like to me. LinkedIn user. Sometimes it has a name, sometimes it doesn't, but welcome from India, whoever you are. Sylvia, welcome from Delaware. Thank you for being a good thinker. Barkley from Washington, D.C., the capital. Anyway, welcome, welcome all of you good thinkers. Keep on letting us know who you are and where you're from. How many of you are kind of deep in the recesses of your mind, either hoping to get back to the way things were pre-pandemic or incredibly curious and maybe even trepidatious or nervous about never getting back to the way things were? Those are kind of some of the questions. So put that in your mind as we delve into adaptability, because you're going to get some actual tangible things that you can do to help yourself become more adaptable. And I would argue that adaptability might be one of the most important traits to navigate the future, and particularly with our information overload and the uncertainty being the only thing that's certain. All right. So what does it mean to get back to the way things were, whether you're facing change in your life that is good or bad, or you're personally or professionally? What does it mean? And what does it mean to adapt to the new normal? Like, does it mean, okay, I've adapted to the new normal, we're all good to go now? What does that mean? All right. So Sylvia says, there was no normal, and I'm not looking forward to going backwards. All right. Time for rubber chickens for Sylvia. There's no normal. It maybe seem like normal. And when some of the events, I think that's a really, really good point that I'd like to highlight, because sometimes the events are so major and so instant that we identify the time before and the time after. It could be some kind of bombing or even the birth of a child or a marriage, where we think about the time before and the time after. And other times it's insidious. Little things change, little things that we adapt and adapt and adapt. And then one day we're there and we look back and say, wait a minute, this is different than the way it used to be. Most change is that way. Most change is insidious. And really, it can seem like the normal or the old normal in the rearview mirror, but Sylvia's point is not looking forward to going backward is probably a good thing, because one of the keys to adaptability is actually looking forward and looking backward to go forward. So I think she's spot on. All right. And the question is, have you gotten used to the way things are now? Is it because you've adapted, or that you're adaptable. So if you feel like, all right, I've got this, I've adapted, or that you're adaptable, which one? So put in the chat, you think you're more adapted or adaptable? All right, so share in the chat what you're thinking. All right. Now, adaptability, we'll define adaptability as the quality of being able to adjust to new conditions. Okay, that's kind of the general definition. But in good thinking, we always have to put a twist on things, because the most common use of these ways of thinking, they're not as fun as some of the different ways of thinking. That's how we improve how to think. So here's a different twist. The ability to be personally modified for a new use or purpose. Well, who's doing the modification? What does that mean? You mean to say that I need to stand to be modified myself for a new use or purpose? In a way, yes. And that modification comes not only from within, internally, but also externally. The needs and the environment force us to be modified. And then internally, we have our own modification tools. And sometimes it's like getting enough sleep or something like that. And other times it's how we think. So there's an internal and external modification that happens to us, and really lending ourselves to that ability to be modified for a new use or purpose, because it expands your capacity to handle change. And that's obvious. No matter how serious that change might be, the more you prepare and the more you become adaptable, the more you're going to be able to handle change. All right. Jeff Ginsburg from Bellevue, Washington. Welcome, Jeff. Bellevue in the house. All right. So it can look like using your energy. Adaptability can look like using your energy to try to change your circumstance, like you can modify your external circumstances. But it really means that you change yourself from within, allowing yourself to thrive in whatever situation you find yourself. And maybe thrive is something that's kind of privilegey to say, like, you should be able to thrive in every situation. Well, some situations, thriving is maybe a nice goal, but surviving is more of a realistic goal. And we have to acknowledge that too. It's easy to say, oh, we should all be able to thrive in every situation. Is that true? So that's my question. Do you think we can all thrive no matter what the situation? Or sometimes thriving is just surviving. And we have to acknowledge that too. All right. So let me know in the comments. All right. So here's my next question. What is one thing that is going on in your life that you would like help understanding? Like if you could just understand this one thing more clearly, it would be so beneficial. What is one thing? And when that occurs to you, think about it. Please put it in the chat, share it in the chat, because what we're going to do with this is have this top of mind as we go through what you can do to improve your adaptability. So one thing that is in your mind that you need help understanding. And I'll give you some ideas. Like maybe you need help understanding what you should study. Well, why do you need help understanding what you should study? Because maybe you need help understanding what you need to know. Or maybe you need help understanding what you need to do to, maybe for a career change, or to get hired, or to be able to go out on your own as an entrepreneur, or to be a better parent. Or maybe the thing that you need to understand is your child or your spouse or your best friend, or how to think about, vaccinations or masks or whatever. What is one thing that you think you need help understanding? All right. So you get that in your mind, and whether you share it in the chat, which would be awesome, or it's just in your mind, all good. Here's the next question. What are you doing to understand it better? Are you just thinking about it and thinking, gosh, I wish I understood that better? Or are you actually, are you actually hoping that the answer will reveal itself to you? Or are you curiously pursuing answers? And if you're curiously pursuing answers to that question, what are you doing? What does that look like? What are your primary sources of information? Is it the same comfort zone of like-minded news sources or friends that you're going to answer these questions? What are you doing to actively pursue answering the most important questions that you have, like how you understand? All right. So Ian, all right, we're going to say hi to Ian. Ian says, as a teacher, I have adapted my teaching to ensure that my students still achieved their potential. Okay, fantastic. And I'm sure that took, I shouldn't assume, but I kind of think that it would probably involve understanding how to do that. And probably you started with, I really need to understand how to ensure my students achieve their potential. And then you had to go out and you didn't just like think about it and have this answer revealed to you. You probably went to a bunch of sources and then took it all in and created a plan. Maybe it just appeared to you. But what are you doing to understand what you're most curious to understand? If you're just hoping it's going to come to you, maybe there's a better plan. And what are you doing to prepare for uncertainty? Because you know that uncertainty, no matter how much you ignore, no matter how much you think you're driving in this driver's seat and you're steering that steering wheel, uncertainty is inevitable. Inevitable. So where are you going to understand uncertainty? Are you just hoping it comes to you? Or are you doing something active? Or are you just kind of bearing down in the places that your comfort zone and ignoring it and hoping that things just work out? Hey, that's a legitimate answer. A lot of us, right? That does not necessarily lend to adaptability. Maybe it's worked so far for you and you think, awesome. But it doesn't correlate with achieving a high level of adaptability. At this point, you've just gotten lucky. Maybe uncertainty hasn't whacked you too hard. All right. So Ian says the pandemic has forced you to do this. Yes, absolutely. Really forced you to look at what it's going to take to help your students achieve their potential. Sylvia says, I'm working on understanding, excuse me, the level of anger and fear in the world today. I use podcasts and articles to help me. I analyze what my role is in this. Brilliant. That's a really good question. How do we understand the level of anger and fear? And that's something I'm kind of interested in too. And I actually go to neuroscience and microbiology because I think our gut biomes have a lot to do with it. The environment has a lot to do with it, even though it seems like it would be like social media maybe or whatever. So that's where where does the lack of balance of our gut bacteria influence our neurochemistry? Like, how does it relate to our anger receptors or whatever? So that's the kind of thing I love to, that's my nerdy way of answering those same questions. Okay. And Fiona says, observing what is logical in reporting and considering why. Okay. What is looking out for logical fallacies? Brilliant. Brilliant. All right. Now the next question, because this is going to kind of prepare to know where we are now and where we can go to move ourselves forward to becoming a little more adaptable. And this is, believe me, this is all stuff that I have to force myself to kind of do and digest all the time. Are you standing in that space between? And that space between has a lot to do with nostalgia, wishing, kind of almost glorifying the way things used to be in this way that is somewhat true and somewhat not true, but not really looking at it with crystal clear, with clarity, just kind of looking back thinking, oh, I'm suffering so much now. It used to be so much better before. Are you standing in that space between what happened, what was, and when we'll get back to that and what it will take to get back to that? Is that a good place to stand? Is standing in that place where you're yearning for the way it used to be, is that a good place to stand? Or do you think that might be a sign that you need to work on adaptability a little bit? What is clearly that's a leading question, but maybe it's a good place to stand because maybe adaptability is just not something you want to achieve. You feel more comfortable closing in and dealing with things and hoping that the things that hit you, the uncertainty that hits you doesn't break through your biofilm, your shield. So how many of you are standing in that place in between? And how many of you are standing in that place in between where you're kind of curious about the things that might be interesting in the past that you can borrow from to bring through to the future? And how many of you are actually working to anticipate the future so that you can prepare yourself for uncertainty? That's really key. So Sylvia says you actually enjoy uncertainty. Okay, you're one of the weird people, kind of like me, to an extent. It piques my curiosity and allows me to reach out to others. I think that's great. And if you have that curiosity, I would argue, and that applied curiosity, that does allow you to get comfortable with being uncomfortable, get comfortable with uncertainty to the point where it's kind of exhilarating. And it's, I'm not going to jump out of an airplane. I am too scared to jump out of an airplane. And I don't feel that there would be much value in it for me. It's not like, oh my God, I'm so curious what it's, I mean, I'm a little curious, but I'm not going to jump out of an airplane. But, if you're really afraid and you want to get over it and jump out of an airplane, that's fine. But maybe you want to do something equivalent, like a mentally equivalent, which would be to jump into uncertainty and put yourself, what is the worst case scenario? And imagining yourself in that worst case scenario. And this is from Stoicism. And then kind of getting comfortable in the murky pond of uncertainty. All right. So there may not be a firm date where coronavirus is behind us. Maybe there will be, but I suspect it will be more insidious than that. Like one day we'll do this and we'll do that. And then pretty soon we'll get used to this and then we'll get used to that. And change will be with this virus insidious, unlike a day event. And in the United States, we talk about 9/11, before 9/11 and after 9/11, before we had to take off our shoes in the airport and after we have to take off our shoes in the airport. That's like one of those kind of big cataclysmic events where we can point to that. But some of the things and most of the things that we need to adapt to are more insidious than that. All right. So the key is kind of avoid that target fixation where you go, okay, this was the date that it all changed. If it wasn't for this event, the world would be different. Yeah, those are storytelling, but things tend to be more systematic and more intertwined than that. So you just, I would say, maybe avoid that target fixation. All right. Now, the idea in business that management should stick to defining what they want to achieve and let the organization focus on how to achieve it. This process of loosening your grip and not letting the company descend into chaos can be tricky. And it's the same thing for ourselves, defining what we want to achieve and then focusing on how to achieve it in letting go a little bit and in incorporating uncertainty a little bit. It can be tricky. There's a U.S. theoretical physicist and Nobel Prize laureate, Philip Warren Anderson, talked about this theory of emergence. And this is an idea that complexity arises from simplicity and that small things form big things with properties different than the sum of their parts when interacting with a part of a greater whole. And he applied in business what a lot of other people have applied, chaos theory, etc. But just a few simple principles will allow you to build systems where what is called macro intelligence and adaptability derive from local interactions and knowledge. So do you know what to do? When you get up every morning, how do you decide what to do? All right, so here's what you need. There are 3 ingredients for adaptability. Let's get into it. Does anyone know or want to take a stab at any of the 3 ingredients that you think you use to be an adaptable person? Not to adapt, but to be adaptable. Because when you adapt, it's kind of target focused. Okay, I've adapted, done, check, I've done this. I've already adapted to this new hybrid way of working. I've already adapted to putting on a mask in the grocery store. I've adapted, check, done. Enough has been asked of me, I've done it. Or these 3 ingredients that are required for adaptability. Anyone, rubber chickens, to anyone who wants to take a stab at adaptability in the 3 ingredients. All right, I'll get into it. Number 1, you can't think that the way you're doing is fine for every situation. You need the freedom from arrogance or pride. And that means that the first ingredient is, drumroll please, humility, intellectual humility. The need to understand that the way that you have done it always, that has been fine for every situation, first of all, maybe it could have even been finer, but it may not apply to how you're going to do it in the future. That's number 1. So you need to kind of get out of, I know what I'm doing and everything I do is fine. That's humility. All right. That's number 1. Now let's see. Okay. We've got a great answer here. Okay. Conduct an evaluation to both yourself and the environment. Excellent. Excellent. Because that hints at how to make the other ingredients. And Fiona says integrity. Do you need integrity to be adaptable? How does integrity play? Maybe. I hadn't thought about that one. Good thinking. But I'm going to stick on just to have adaptability. And maybe you need integrity. I don't know. But I think that the key ingredients other than humility, openness to change, absolutely. Openness to change You can't have humility without openness to change. Fantastic. Absolutely. Self-awareness. Self-awareness. Excellent. But I'm going to give you 2 other ingredients. Not that these are wrong. They're totally right. And I think they're ingredients within ingredients. But I want to be really specific because I want to give the ingredients as something you can go and gather to make a recipe. Ready? You need the skill of anticipation. You need the skill of anticipation. So you need situational awareness. Situational awareness is like sometimes you're walking down the street and you're on your phone and you're looking at stuff and you don't even realize that, what is happening around you. And situational awareness is, is hampered by being on the phone when you're walking around, having your life be focused on the screen. Maybe you put your GPS in and pretty soon you stop remembering how to get around your own city because you're just following right, left, and you have no situational awareness because you're taking your brain away from that situational awareness. So that's really important. You can practice. Like you can look around in your environment, whether it's your place that you live or outside, and try to notice more. That's huge. Noticing more is imperative for situational awareness. And also it is imperative for anticipation. You also need to introduce new methods and techniques to future use. So there's 2 different ways you can look at in kind of enhancing your anticipation. 1, situational awareness, and using new techniques that come from 2 places. 1, your own experience. And remember, more of your own anecdotal evidence does not equal data. So if you have information, and we talked about this actually in our new LinkedIn Learning course. How many of you have taken the new LinkedIn Learning course, our new critical thinking LinkedIn Learning course, developing a critical thinking mindset? It talks about this because it talks about the fact that your own anecdotal evidence does not equal reliable data. 3 people who've said this or that. That does not mean that everyone is talking about that or everyone believes that or everyone's suffering from that. Okay. So this means that you have to take your own experiences, but you have to take your own anecdotal experiences with a grain of salt. And then the second place that you can gather new methods and techniques are from other people's experiences. And that goes from both past and anticipated future experiences. So that requires knowing people who are not like you, engaging with people who are not like you, learning what people who are not like you are anticipating. And I don't mean just people who disagree with you, but people in different fields. What is the AI field saying about the future? What is the autonomous vehicle field? What is the bacterial and the virologist field? What is, the innovation field or the meditation field or the religion? Like, what are the fields saying about the future? And if you can be one of those super forecasters, or you can anticipate the future, then you can start putting yourself in those situations. All right, let's take some comments. We've got some really good comments. Yeah. Okay. Yes. I agree. Anticipation can be referred to as strategic thinking. Absolutely. Systems thinking, strategic thinking, willingness. Heidi says willingness. Yeah, you got to be, that's so true. All right. What else do we have? Let's see. We got, okay. Okay. So strategic thinking. Ooh, I have it. And it is amazing. Oh, you've taken the course. Fantastic. I'm so glad you've taken the course, Developing the Critical Thinking Mindset, or Developing a Critical Thinking Mindset. Also, if you're really interested in critical thinking, we have Critical Thinking for Better Judgment Decision-Making on LinkedIn. And mark your calendars for September 15th or 16th. We are launching the 3rd in the series, Critical Thinking for More Effective Communication. So how to communicate using critical thinking, which is kind of different. I think you're going to love it. All right. So we know we have humility. We know we have anticipation. Anticipation takes some bravery, because to look into the future and not say, oh, that's never going to happen, or I don't care, it's going to happen anyway, I'm not going to prepare for it, or it'll be what it is. Not thinking, how will I respond to that? What if? Not what did I do in the past, or tell me about a time you did this, but what if this, and what would I do? And sometimes you go to the worst case scenario, like a stoic, and you see, hey, I survived the worst case scenario. All right. Let's see what we've got. Taking the intro class. So Sylvia's taken the intro class. Fantastic. All right. Love the advice to get along with people that are different than you, including other fields. Interesting to get new points of view. You have to, because if all you know is if what we see and what we perceive, we think that that's all that there is, then we're missing exactly what we know super forecasters are able to do, which is take disparate information and put it together. One of the things that super forecasters are able to do is think in probabilities. So understanding statistics. I would argue that if you are going to study anything other than, critical thinking and decision making and those kinds of things, but the thing that probably helps you understand what is being said and what is being presented and what might happen in the future is really an understanding of statistical or probabilistic thinking. So anything you can get to understand statistics better and probabilities better is going to be huge, helping you anticipate. And the third thing that you need, the third ingredient, is improvisation. Now, the definition of improvisation is the art of or act of doing without previous preparation. But I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that definition of improvisation because it's all about preparation and then letting go. And so I don't think that, tell me if you agree. I don't think improvisation works without preparation, but improvisation means you practice reacting to what happens. And even taking an improv class or even doing some online training in improvisation is an incredible tool when mixed with humility and anticipation to become adaptable. So those are the three ingredients. You need to be able to assess things for improvisation in real time. You need creative intelligence. You need experience so that you either experience it in the past or you're thinking about experiences. Like, you don't have to experience everything to prepare for it, because some of the things you're just not in the, you're just not in the environment where you can, but it doesn't mean it won't ever happen. And so, I'm here in earthquake country. So I'm here in the Pacific Northwest of the United States. We're on a huge fault line, and it's, we're expecting the big one. And the vast majority of people that I know, they don't have a plan in place. They don't have a go kit. And I have to admit, I didn't either, till my husband decided to get prepared, to prepare ourselves to be adaptable in a situation like the earthquake. And, you kind of know it. And then people are frantically panicking when we've been telling you this is what's going to happen, but you don't think it's going to happen to you. So if you know something like that, get yourself prepared mentally first. And then there might be some physical preparations or some role-playing situations or some scenario playing out. But that's how you become adaptable, is not ignoring. All right. So we've got, what if some sort of realistic thinking, anticipating the worst case scenarios and plan for them, thus lowering our positivity or high expectations in the outcomes. Okay, that is excellent. Rubber chickens, because that's kind of the whole basis of Stoicism, is not being precious about imagining worst case scenarios and imagining worst case scenarios and realizing that the worst case scenario is usually temporary. And, what's the worst thing that can happen is something that, maybe is traumatic to think about. But when you ignore that, you lose your ability to become adaptable. And to anticipate and improvise, it's helpful to remember the three legs of the good thinking stool. And this is, again, you'll catch this in developing a critical thinking mindset, but give you a little cheat on this. The three legs of the good thinking stool are critical thinking, strategic thinking, and creative thinking. All right, so you think to yourself, okay, am I just this creative thinker who's always kind of thinking about turning problems upside down and seeing new solutions? Or am I a strategic thinker who's always trying to get to the root cause of a problem? Or am I a critical thinker where I'm asking, how do I know if this is really true? Busting assumptions, those kinds of things. So those, understanding how to strengthen all three legs of the good thinking stool are really important. So, your critical thinking should be the foundation so that you're relying on good evidence, reliable, relevant, valid evidence. So you start with the critical thinking. You might then go into the strategic thinking. What are the patterns and likely solutions of what might happen? How do I prepare for these problems? How do I assess trends over time? Strategic thinking. And then creative thinking. And then critical thinking again. I bring critical thinking again back, because if you start your strategic thinking and you're getting into the storytelling and these pattern making, but you're not double checking to make sure that this story is not so enticing that you're being kind of dissuaded with or confusing that with reliable evidence. So just take another step back into critical thinking and then go into the creative thinking. How can I see this from a new angle or perspective? What can I do? All right. So Here, when it comes to your career, here are some things you can ask yourself to prepare for, to be adaptable and to prepare for the future. What do people value today? And that might be different tomorrow. Something could happen that makes what people value today different. But at the core, there's probably some things that people value. And then what's likely to be valued tomorrow? This is career adaptability type stuff. And what can I learn to do that most other people can't do? So if you're going into something that everyone else can do, then the barrier to entry is low, but where it's easier to step in, it's harder to stand out. So if you're going into a field where it's pretty easy to get in, but it's harder to stand out, you need to know that too. So maybe you can find some area, what people value today, what you anticipate they'll value tomorrow, and you may have some little skill or some little way of thinking about it that can make you stand out. What can I learn? Because now, you're constantly learning. It doesn't mean, check, I've learned that and I'm done. It means, what can I learn? And then again, what can I learn and what can I learn? Lifelong learner, hashtag lifelong learner. What can I learn to do that most people can't do? So how much time do you spend guessing what an institution or a person or people value so you can prepare to meet what they're looking for? Again, this is for your career. And here's what you can do. So you think about the humility, anticipation, improvisation. I would start with the goal. I suggest starting with the goal of shortening the time it takes you to adjust to each new situation. So just a small goal, each new situation, maybe something that traditionally makes you mad or distracts you, just start with the goal of reducing that time. We're going to get through this quickly. Keep track of the expected and unexpected changes that you confront. Keep a journal. It's really hard to remember all of the changes that you should pat yourself on the back for having gone through and adapted to. So you need to acknowledge that. And then the anticipated changes. So keep a journal. Today, I never thought I would see this. We got cut off in traffic right before COVID. We were at the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas. And we were in an Uber, and this car cut us off in traffic twice. And then we looked and there was no driver in the car. So I remember that moment where I was furious at this driver. And then I looked and there was no driver. And then I felt like, where do I put that anger? Where do I put my road rage? Where do you put your road rage when there's no driver? It's just an autonomous vehicle. That was kind of weird. So I remember that I've got to adapt my thinking. That was a moment in time. All right. Research what's happening. We talked about this, and look outside your boundary of competency. If you are constantly making your predictions from within your silo of sameness, you will not be able to be adaptable, because you will only be adapting to the most commonly assumed changes that you expect to see, and you won't know. You'll get blindsided by other things. So step outside your silo of sameness and do the thought experiments. Let's say that that most people when they get older, or a lot of people when they get older, have some kind of memory loss. But you think to yourself, well, that's not going to be me. Well, what if it is? What will you do? If you have things in your house that could be a danger to you or other people, what will you do if you start having cognitive decline? I don't want to think about that. I'm only 35. I'm not 35, but I'm only 35 years old, or I'm only in my mid 50s. Well, think about it. Go there. That's how you become adaptable. That's a thought experiment. Or let's say quantum computing is 5 years away and it's going to be a mass market, or 10 years away, and you're looking at doing some kind of career that may be better done by a computer. And you say, oh, computers will never replace us. Well, what if they do? What are you going to do to adapt? Those are scary thoughts. Denying it, or I don't believe it and it's not going to happen, fine. But then you can't put on the banner of adaptability. So you better decide on adapting actions in advance. Think branches and sequels. Branches are options and sequels are what you should do in a worst case scenario. So create those branches and sequels so that you can prepare for what you could do if these different scenarios happen, and use signal detection. Pay attention to what's happening out there and be realistic about the fact that some of the things you think won't happen will happen, and how you can prepare. And this should not stress you out, although probably it does a little bit. But the key lies in achieving a permanent state of adaptability. Not I've adapted and I'm done, but a permanent state of adaptability. Everyone needs to adapt in order to survive long term. But the real issue is not just transforming and adapting to the new normal right now as if it's like a one-time thing. I've made it, I've done it, and I'm not doing it again. It's writing the ability to adapt and transform into your DNA. It's developing a mechanism or a reflex for dealing with whatever change or crisis comes along, whether it's financial, technological, environmental, relationship, or health related. And I'm going to say, I am not going to correct you that because you're wrong, because you're right. There are some examples of situations what are some examples of situations that become compatible with improvising? Because I think that not all situations are adequate to improvising. Absolutely. And some of them, this is a really good point. Now, improvising doesn't mean you're improvising in the moment. It means actually imagining, anticipating, and then in your mind going through the thought experiment of what it would look like to react to that. So it's a little different than just improvising on the fly when it happens. It's practicing improvisation as if the change has already happened, so that when it does happen, you may still have to improvise because you're not going to be able to think of every single thing. So that's a really good point. But practicing improvisation, and then let's see, we've said, okay, I believe that adapting is the phase next to realistic thinking. Yep. Excellent. So that's it on adaptability. Went a little long. Sorry about that. See you next week on Good Thinking. If you have other topics that you'd like to discuss, or if you are looking at any of the online LinkedIn learning courses and you want to dive deeper into some of this stuff, especially in the areas of critical thinking and decision-making and applied curiosity, that's kind of my area. But if you want to dive deeper into any of these things, please let us know what topics you want. And thank you for being here. And Heidi asked a really good last-minute question, which we will address. What about fear? Yeah, it's scary. But fear is easy to desensitize yourself against if you work with thought experiments. You allow yourself to feel what it's like for these worst case scenarios to happen. Because as Matt points out, every change has its gift and terror. And that's so true. So true. So many loved ones I know need to hear this. I think folks around me are just overwhelmed and it's hard to learn when you're stressed. Yes. Thank you. Thank you for being a good thinker and thank you for being here. Just remember humility, anticipation, and improvisation, and start working on those things. And I think we're going to all work toward becoming more adaptable, which is putting adaptability into our DNA. So thank you. Good thinkers. Have a great week.